What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Existential Stoic Podcast. I'm Randy. That's my buddy Danny. What's up, Danny?
What's up, Randy?
Yeah, so we're changing up the intro today because I didn't exactly know any questions to ask people about this to begin with.
Hey,
But I
it's
had
all
this idea for an episode because, with existentialism, with stoicism, we talk a lot about death, how that's imminent.
yeah.
It's like almost guaranteed, that and taxes. So,
I mean, it's 100% guaranteed.
what, taxes or death?
Both.
No, kidding.
Really, death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, anyways, we're all going to die. And I heard this quote. I heard it from Steve Harvey, but he attributed it to TD Jakes. And the quote said, "I would hate to die and never do the thing I was born to do." And this is something that really struck me because I get distracted. I'm sure a lot of other people get distracted too. And I'm going to die one day. I have a limited amount of time on this earth, but it would seem to be essential to really do what I was put here to do. So it kind of brings two things about: one, what am I born to do? And two, is there actually just one thing? Is there actually something? Is it predestined? All of that stuff. So we're going to be talking about all that stuff today. But to begin with,
Well,
Dan, what are
yeah.
you going to say?
I was, I was going to say that I think that question's a good one, though, for existentialists and Stoics, too, because I think that's part of the reason why they emphasize death so much and acceptance of death and being aware that we're going to die. Because, it's like, especially in this time period, I think people were a lot more familiar and comfortable with death back in the past because people died constantly, dude. Like, people had 12 kids and like what, 5 of them made it to adulthood, and then like you die because you get kicked by a horse or something, or whatever. Things happened all the time. Death is a part of life, but it's not so much anymore. There's so many interventions. Life is so prolonged. I mean, people are 70, they have a major surgery and they're still fine for decades. It's crazy. We've extended life so long in many cases. So I think it's something that we can easily sort of ignore, but by ignoring it, we get rid of that sort of immediacy, the importance and the value of this life. I think that's also part of it, is recognizing that, this is important because it's one chance and it's short. It's not going to last forever. So I shouldn't just do stuff that's not important. I shouldn't do stuff that's not for me. And, I think that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, there was a time in my life where, like, I heard this saying that you have to do what you have to do until eventually you get to a point where you can do what you want to do. And there was definitely a phase in my life. I know you're like, that's not true.
I like that one. Sounds terrible.
Yeah. There was definitely a phase in my life where I felt like I had to do what I had to do. Like, growing up, I felt like I had to do good in school. I had to go to university. And then once I was out of university, I had to pay off student debt, and I had to be like a good upstanding citizen, and I had to get married and buy a house and all this stuff. And it wasn't until I had done most of that stuff and was very, very unhappy with my life that I got to a point of recognizing, okay, what is it that I'm supposed to do here? What do I want to do?
I think that's the hard question, though, right? Because it's like, I think and you're right. I think for a lot of us, we do get stuck in these perceived obligations, these social or cultural values that we get caught up in, of what is worth, what is a good life, without ever really thinking about it ourselves, especially when we're young. It's hard. It is hard. And like that idea that you can do anything, it sounds like a nice thing in theory, but in reality, it's like, well, I got to pay bills. I got to eat. And it's like, yeah, you do. I mean, you do. So yes, it is true that, like, you might have to work a job that you don't like, or you might have to do something just to make ends meet, but that doesn't have to be the only thing you do. That doesn't have to be the end. Right. And I think this is where it's crucial to think about, like, what do you want? Because you can always be working towards that. It might not happen today. It's probably going to take time, but there's a way to make it happen. And I think that's as long as you're working towards it, you won't have that regret. You're building that life that you want. You're building that life that you can be proud of,
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm sure a lot of people out there who are listening are like, but I just don't have time. I mean, I wake up, I go right to work, and I come home, have to cook for the kids, and then watch, 2 hours of Netflix before going to sleep. Like, I just don't have the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the answer to
It
this
is
one's kind
hard.
of obvious. It's your favorite kicking horse. Netflix and the distractions of social media, different things like that. Because all throughout the day, there are little moments that we probably get distracted looking on Facebook or Instagram or something like that. And if we actually check how much time over the course of a day, it probably adds up to about an hour. Now, an hour a
Well,
day isn't that much, but an hour of the day over the course of 10 years, that's something huge.
you could do a lot with that. Not to mention too, I think keep in mind too when you do this math in your head, because I think a lot of us like I like watching TV, I like movies, right? Keep in mind that all the streaming services have the autoplay so that you don't stop watching because you're way more likely to keep watching if the next episode starts immediately, right? So you'll binge it. All these social media, everything, they have very intelligent people working on how to get you to stay on that page, to keep clicking, to keep scrolling. So, I mean, if you keep that in mind, you remind yourself that they are working against you to distract you as much as possible. And I think, so there's nothing inherently wrong with any of it, I think, but it's like moderation, right? I think
Mhm.
for a lot of people too, if you think you don't have time, one of the things I started doing was routine your day out so that you know what you have to do. Like if you got to go to work from 8 to 5 and in the morning you need to eat, you need to get up and take a walk or something, take care of your kids, whatever, routine it out so you know exactly how long these things take. So that you can look at your day and you say, okay, I know and I can comfortably do it. I know that from 6 in the morning till say 8 at night, I got to do stuff. But if I do that stuff correctly in the right way, it all gets done. Everybody's happy. I set aside time for all the things that are important, whatever. Then 8 to 9 maybe is mine, and maybe that's my time to do something. I might be tired, but at least it's my time. And if I do something interesting, I'll be energized, right? And I can keep at it.
You touched on a good thing there because everybody's like, oh, I got to commute to work. And they end up listening to the news or to some just
Oh
talk show
God,
that's
yeah.
just like senseless, blah, blah, blah. And if you listen, the average person in America on their commute to and from work, if they just listen to educational material, in 3 years, they get the equivalent of a 2-year degree. So
Yeah, yeah.
if you think you need to go back to school or get an associate's or whatever it is, just listen to good educational material in your
Oh,
car.
dude.
Yeah.
No, you know what? That's such a good point because you know what? You're on a walk in your car, listen to books on tape, listen to podcasts or whatever that's educational. Because the other thing too is it's a great way to figure out what you want to do. Because if you don't know for sure what you're after, but you listen to a bunch of stuff in wide interests, you might find yourself starting to veer towards certain things. And that's a good indicator, right? I found out, I mean, I've known that myself too, I started doing things and it's like, I found out I love, I mean, I always knew I liked technology, but I love programming and stuff. It's so fun. So now I'm doing that finally, and it's like those kind of things. I think we have to become aware of the fact and acknowledge that that's what we really want, that we are really interested in it. And once we acknowledge that, you just start making headway.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's important to kind of go after things that you're afraid of. Or at least
Yeah.
at least for me, that was a thing because ever since I was young, I always thought being a hacker would be like the coolest thing ever. However, going to jail doesn't sound so great. But I mean, turns out nowadays there's a whole profession called ethical hacking, and you get to
Yeah.
protect companies from the bad hackers out there. And it's crazy because all the time I was like, oh no, I could never do that. And it's just like, well, why don't you try? And just like the more that I learn about it, the more that I do it, it's just like, wow, this is awesome. And it's totally something that's achievable.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head too. Is like, just why don't you try? What is stopping you? I mean, I think this is we talked about Marcus Aurelius's meditations, and he talks about making yourself aware that you're going to die. That thought should be crucial. It's an important thing to think about, to reflect on your own death, the fact that life is impermanent. The existentialists talk about it all the time as well, and part of that is because it's supposed to also make you think about your life differently. Why aren't you doing the things that are important to you? Why aren't you taking action? Why aren't you trying to live your best life? Why aren't you trying to be the best person you can be? What is stopping you? What really is stopping you? Because I think most of us, it's our own fears, our own concerns, our own sense of obligations, our own skewed sense of correctness or rightness that's getting in our way and blocking us and limiting us. But if we really just try, and yes, And the other hard part is, yes, you have to stick to it because your progress might not be immediate. Most of us are like, wait, I watched a YouTube video and I wasn't perfect at it that second, so I gave up. And it's like, well, yeah, dude, you're trying to learn a skill. It's going to take a while, but you can do it. And I think that's that's the other side of that. It's trying to be, really attentive to the fact that you can do anything. If somebody else is doing it, you can do it.
Yeah. So I think there are two big questions that came up, at least to me, when I was looking at this question. Like, I would hate to die and not do the thing I was really born to do. The first is, how do I know what that thing is? And the second is, am I doing enough? Those are like the two big questions that came up for me, because I think with each attempt, I get closer and closer to figuring out that thing that I was born to do, or at least because it's never a finished thing until my life is over anyway. So it's kind of just like waypoints along the way. So like I do something that gets me to be able to see a little bit further, and then I can do more. So there's that. But then I'm like, okay, but am I doing enough? Because other people have done more, and when is enough? Thing. What do you think?
I think starting on that question, second one,
maybe
is more important for now, because dude, the when is enough. I've thought about that a lot. It's like, you're right. If you're doing it right, it's going to be until you die, basically. I mean, I think about all my idols, the thinkers I really admired, people I really admired. They never stopped until they literally couldn't do it anymore. Nietzsche literally collapsed. And, that was it. It's like after that, he couldn't do it anymore. He still tried, but couldn't. I mean, it's like, so I think there's this drive to keep going. And so I think it's just that to recognize that the more you do, the more opportunities you create, the more you can see things differently and in unique ways, the more you're likely to do. And things change over time. So you might change your direction and stuff. That's okay. So I think as long as you keep working towards it, you're never going to be upset, because you're never leaving anything undone. Does that make sense? Maybe that's a way to look at it. Like, not look at it like, am I doing enough, in the sense of like, is each day filled enough with enough crap? Because I don't know if that's healthy, because you get to the point where you just do nothing but try and strive for work, right? And you do want other things in your life, other values, but trying to recognize what really matters to me, orienting my life around that, and leaving nothing undone. Maybe that's a better way to think of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So like, if you want to do something, starting it, right? And making sure you're working towards it, not leaving that undone. Don't wait. Don't put it off. If it's a matter of, you really value this person in your life, well, spend time with them. Don't put that off. Don't let other stuff get in the way. But the trick is, though, you have to know what you value, because, otherwise you can go all over the place. And I think this is knowing ourselves is the hard part too.
Yeah. I think you make a really good point there, is just kind of going after what it is that you want, or that you might even think you want. Because a lot of people have this whole someday plan. They're like, oh, when I retire, I'll travel, or
my bucket list.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, you never know. The problem is, you don't know when your bucket's up. Like, so, yeah. I always try and, I mean, we've talked about this before. Like, if I only had 6 months left to live, what would I regret anything? What would I want to get done? What would I spend my time doing those 6 months? And I think that's a really important question, because that puts your life in perspective, and then you can actually see what's important to you and what you're just doing.
That's actually a great exercise too, which is, if you really don't know, if you're really unclear about your values, get out a journal, put at the top of the page, what if I had 6 months to live? A few pages later, but what if I had a year? A few pages later, what if I had 5 years? And a few pages later, what if I had 10? And then really try to imagine, what would your life look like if you had 6 months to live, if you had a year, if you had 5, if you had 10? Then read through them and look at, well, what does this tell me about my values? Am I family oriented? Am I achievement oriented? Am I doing the wrong career? Do I think I can make some progress in this area? Do I really want to make, do I really want to try and make a name for myself? What is it that's driving me? And that could be a great way to kind of isolate that,
Yeah. And then once you figure out what you would be doing, get after it, start doing it. Like, if you hate your job, start finding another one. Or if you really, I mean, if you had 6 months to live and you would go travel to every country in Europe, go do it. Like,
figure out how to do it. Yeah.
for all you know, you could have 6 months left to live. Yeah.
And I think that's the hard part, though. I think it's like a big part of it is it's stopping that voice that says it's impossible, or that it's too difficult, or that you wouldn't know where to start. Because the fact is once you start, you'll find out where to start, and you'll find a way. It's always the case that once you start on something, you'll figure it out. You don't need, you just figure it out. And it might take some planning and it might take some research, but you'll figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. So like I heard this saying a while back and I wrote it down in my journal, the part that I read every morning. And it says, trust in the universe and take the next step. And like,
I like that.
That's all you really ever have to do is just do the next thing. Because we get so overwhelmed. We're like, oh, I want to go travel and visit every country in Europe. And we're like, oh, but that's so much. Like you have to get a rail pass and then you have to book flights and the ATK tests and like, and it's just like, it gets overwhelming. And you just forget that it's really only one step at a time. So like you just figure out what's the next step, and then just do it. And then once you get that done, what's the next step? And then just do it. And just trust that the universe has got your back.
Yeah. No, I think that's the crucial thing too. You break everything down into small parts and it's manageable. It is. It always is. And I think that we focus on, instead of focusing on the steps in the journey, we focus on the end. And from right now in my current state to the end seems so insurmountable, because I'm looking at effectively a transition from me now to me transformed. But I'm forgetting that this transformation occurs in a journey, right? And slowly over time. So when I look at it slowly over time in incremental steps, it's no longer this dramatic transformation. It's a real life journey, right? That I can do. It's a path that I can walk down one step at a time, and I can get to the end. It's possible. It's funny too. I think a big thing of this too is starting to look at, like, really reflecting on what you want is also hard too, because you have to shut out the noise of others too. I think it was in Thus Spoke Zarathustra. I think Nietzsche's character Zarathustra says, somebody asked him about the way, and he says, "This is my way. What's yours?" That's how I respond to people who ask me about the way. And I think it's a really good point. Like, this is my path I'm walking. What's your path? And I'm not going to criticize you for your path. I'm not going to judge you for your path, but don't judge me for mine either, because this is my life. At the end of the day, I got to be happy with it.
Well, I think you're spot on with that. It's like developing a thick skin to where, like, even if people criticize me for my path, that's totally cool because I'm loving it. So like, like,
I'm loving it.
But it is, because you got to develop thick skin. Like I remember back in high school how it was so much more like you wanted to just kind of be, or at least me personally, I felt like I want to be so accepted by everybody and not criticized and not looked at as like weird or whatever. Whereas like nowadays, I just really don't care that much. Like, so what if I'm weird? What's normal? Broken, unhappy. I don't want to be broken, unhappy. Okay. So like,
but that's a bitch about being young though too. It's that desire to be in a group, right? You really want to be in the group. You really want to be accepted because you feel like that acceptance is also a validation of your value. But the fact is that's a lie. It's not the case, because it doesn't matter, because those values aren't your values, right? I mean, that's the bitch of it, but you don't learn that till you're older. I think that's the wisdom part. I mean, it really is. It comes with age.
Yeah. So I would hate to die and not do the thing I was born to do. I really like what you said about just making sure you're on the path. I think that's important.
Well, I think, and walking around, well, like you said too, developing a thick skin. I was going to mention too, I'm glad you reminded me, was like, I think it's hard because a lot of us too, like the people we think we love the most in our lives that are closest to us are going to sometimes put up the most resistance. Like, I try this myself. Like, when people I love really want to try something and do something, I just support them. I don't think about the consequences. Like, I'll give you a good example. Like, my partner, she got a master's and then she wanted to go into tattooing. And I was like, do it, because I know you're going to be good at it. I know you'll like it. And who cares? Like, who cares about the other stuff that you already did? If that's going to do it, do it. We'll figure it out. We will figure it out. It won't be that hard. It might be more difficult for a little while or something, but that's okay. Because long term, it's going to be worth it. And I think, like, try and think that way about how would I respond to somebody I loved that really had something they wanted to do, and then turn that back to yourself. Try to. And then
Yeah.
remember that, because when people are critical and when people are judge you, or they say you can't do that, you're not smart enough and stuff, well, then ask yourself, do these people really give a shit about me? Do they really care about my happiness, or are they worried about their image or what they can talk about to their friends and whatever, right?
Mhm.
Because that's also, I think, a difficult thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you gotta give yourself that love and acceptance that you're looking for, and you give it to
Yeah.
yourself enough, and then you have it, and everybody comes looking at you for it because you're already full of it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think alongside what you were just saying there with being supportive of other people is being able to recognize the toxicity of some people. And this is something that I've totally noticed with age, is that like
Oh
I
God.
pick
Yeah.
up I pick up so quickly like the vibe that people are putting out. And it's so crazy how many people are just like brainwashed into just this toxic like news cycle, negative,
Yeah.
everything negative, and all they want to do is just keep going back to the negative stuff. And it's just like, wow, you really got to surround yourself with the proper people if you're looking to be on your right path.
Well, that's the trick of it, right? You guys surround yourself with people that are supportive, where it's reciprocated, and where their attitudes are in the right place, that they're in the right frame of mind and they're doing the same things you're doing. And that's hard. It's difficult. It is. All of these things are hard. None of them are, I should say, easy in a sense. They sound easy and they should be. It's unfortunate, but it is what it is.
Mhm.
I just because I'm thinking about Zarathustra, I do want to bring up one other thing. When he talks about the free spirit, he has those three metamorphoses in that work. We talked about that before. I always like that the one of the most important ones is the from transitioning from the camel to the lion, because the lion says no, and the camel's carrying all the burdens of all these obligations of culture, family, the world outside of us, the external, and finally saying no to all that is the first step to creating your freedom, right? And I think that's important, that you have to say no to all these perceived obligations, perceived self concepts that you apply to yourself, perceived notions of value, because you have to figure it out yourself. And that's the hard part. And I think, and it's not always a quick process of like just rejecting everything. It's not always that simple. But a lot of times I think it's incremental and it snowballs. But once you start doing it, you start realizing that you are an agent. You have an intentionality, agency. You can make your own path. And once you start doing it, you start doing it more and more effectively, and it becomes more and more easy over time.
That's a great point, and I'm always reminded. I don't remember what the situation was, but probably like a dozen or more years ago, I was up against something where I had this obligation, and you said to it, "Well, if you didn't have the obligation, would you still do it?" And the answer was clearly no. And you're like, "Well, then don't do it."
Right?
And
Who
it was just like a
cares?
light went off. Like I was just carrying this burden for such a long time, and I'm not saying shuck all responsibilities, but it's like some things in life, like you're saying, the transition to the line, you have to be able to say no,
Yeah.
even if you made commitments previously and they're just not in line with what your life is
Yeah.
now. Sometimes you just need to say no and accept the responsibility
Dude,
of breaking those commitments.
I started saying no so much. And like, it's funny because like people get mad at me in my life because I'm like, because like they'll tell me something. I'm like, you don't have to do that, right? Like, even if it's related to me, I'm like, you don't have to do that. I mean, one, I don't care. It's okay if you don't want to. If you have a reason, do whatever you got to do. But like, if it involves other people, like, and they're like, well, no, I said, I was like, they're like, it's not that simple. I'm like, it is though. You just say no. Who cares? What's gonna happen? What is like, and that's what I really think about it. Like, what is this imagined consequence that's gonna happen? If the people really like you, they'll understand. They'll get over it,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And they'll learn who you are more, because maybe like, especially if it's like, I see it a lot with people feeling the urge to go out all the time. It's like, if you don't want to go out all the time, just don't. Maybe that's not
Mm-hmm.
who you are. And that's okay. The people that are your friends will realize it. It's just funny because it's like
Well,
we
we
build this
we
like,
blow up the consequences. Like we think. I
yeah,
mean, in Marcus Aurelius's meditations, he was talking about like, let go of who you are, because no matter how powerful you are, you're gonna die and people are gonna forget you. And he's saying this as literally the most powerful man in the world at his
yeah,
time. He's saying,
yeah,
listen, you're gonna disappear. Nobody's gonna care. Like the earth is around for literally a blip in the lifetime of the universe. So all the consequences that we think that we have, and granted, they feel big, they feel very,
yeah.
very big to you, but in the grand scheme of things, they're not that great, and chances are you'll be able to get through it.
Well, and that's the point of perspective, right? It's keeping that perspective or returning to that perspective when you need it. that broader, larger life perspective, because I think the proximity to our own problems makes us overblow them, makes us imagine these huge, overwhelming burdens, right? I ran into that problem with my student loans, right? Where I got to the point where I was afraid to even call the companies to deal with it because I just didn't want to address it, right? I was just denying it. And but once I started dealing with it, it gets dealt with, right? It's like it's so much easier and you feel so much better. But we work ourselves up, we imagine this crap, and then we just don't, we basically burn ourselves out and make ourselves so overwhelmed that actually we make ourselves like what is it, impotent and unable to act at all. And I think that's it's the worst part. So getting that perspective back, and I think that's why he reminds himself all the time, like at the end of the day, what's it matter? And
Yeah.
I mean, it's what I always admired about the Stoics and the existentialists is that mindset. Like, we are going to die,
And
and it's probably nothing afterwards. So take
yeah.
advantage of this life.
Well, like, what's the crazy part is, like, we say that, people want to leave a legacy. And so he wrote the Meditations. He left his legacy, but he's still dead. I
Yeah,
think a lot of people forget that he's still dead. Like, every problem that he ever had is gone. And every bad thing that he ever thought was going to happen is done. So, like, even though we have his writings, he's still dead. So what are you waiting for?
yeah. Well, it's funny. Like we get caught up in wanting to, we want to immortalize ourselves, right? So what are the things we do? We try and reproduce. We try and make a name for ourselves by achievements of great works. We try and gain power and recognition, right? But all those things, again, don't matter. Once you're dead, you're still dead. You're still gone. Even if your name lives on, you don't know what it amounts to. And it's not going to last forever. It doesn't matter. Humanity doesn't last forever. And it's like, I think this is the funny thing. Like, even like, that's why you have to really get down to what's important to you. Because like, I see, it's funny, you see these people like with extreme wealth, unhappy. It's because guess what? Just collecting money, you're not going to take any of that shit with you either. None of the crap you buy is going with you when you die either. None of it. The fact is that what makes this life good is the meaning you give it. And if those things really aren't meaningful, it's not going to be anything. You'll still be left wanting.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, when I get the opportunity, I go sit in a cemetery and I look at all these tombstones and I try and wrap my head around the notion that all of these people at one time were just as alive as I am. And like, one day I'm going to be just as dead and gone as they are. And it's like, it's crazy because it's not something that I can say I've been able to wrap my head around, but it's like, it's just crazy that, the time that we have is so limited. We all think like, oh, average life expectancy 72, whatever. I still got 40 plus. And it's like, yeah, man, I don't know. I don't know.
Well, it's tricky too, because, it's like we want to trick ourselves into thinking that we have that time because that makes us feel better. It makes us be able to push it off. And it's like, but I think living with it's important too, because there's that side of it. Like, well, look, that is like, it's the great equalizer, right? We're all going to die. So what matters is what you do now, not then, not later, now, right? Right now. So, and, but it's also can be a lot. And I think this is where it gets you too. It can be a lot of pressure too, because this can also turn negative on yourself where you start beating yourself up because you're not doing those things right now. So it has to be a balance, I think, of recognizing that it should be a motivating force. It should be a force to get you focused on your path, finding it, keeping your eyes open, right? Being mindful of who you are, of what you want, of your values, and trying to pursue it and trying to create that life and being, and I think part of that too should be being a good person, but that's me. But like, I think it's like finding that because, it's the only way to really find meaning and make it meaningful. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't really mean anything.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
Yeah. But I mean, you have a great point there now, because now is the only time we can ever act anyways. So like, looking at it, like, what can I do now to move me in the direction of the life that I want?
And that's the tough thing, right?
Yeah, that's up to you.
Answering it though, but that's you're right. That's the question you should be asking yourself. And if you feel stuck, I think, and this, I can say this, when I was really depressed, I think, one of the hardest things I found was taking action, right? And one of the things that really helped me with that was journaling, writing, because it was one thing I could do that in a sense was a passive activity in the sense I wasn't physically acting in the world, but I was doing an action. And it really helped me work through things to make myself realize that, no, I can do something. And once you start doing one thing, the other things get easier as long as you just start doing them now. I think that's, you have to like reaffirm your agency in the world, because it's so easy to feel like things are out of control, they're overwhelming, that we have no power, that we're victims, blah, 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 blah. And we make ourselves out to be just these like pebbles getting pushed around by the waves of the water in the stream, instead of being, you know, a person standing in the stream who can walk in any direction they want, you know. And I think once you realize that you're still a person, your agency comes back. And when your agency comes back, then you can start making your own path. And you can figure out all the other crap, because all the other crap, I think, comes after that, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So I think that's pretty good. Answer some of my questions. I think as long, I mean,
Good.
I was really inspired by the thing that as long as you're on the right path, and that makes so much sense, because, you know, like as long
Yeah.
as long as you're going in the right direction and you're doing it at a speed that you're comfortable with, like maybe pushing
You're
yourself
good.
a little. Yeah, you're good. You're
Yeah.
good.
What more
You'll
could you
get there.
ask for?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think
Awesome.
it is important. You got to push yourself sometimes, right? I think that's always good,
Yeah.
because it helps you learn your limits.
Mm-hmm.
And it also helps, I don't know, for me too, it helps me see like what else is really important that I don't want to miss out on, you know, sometimes, because I confront those situations. And I'm like, I want to see them though. So then you got to, you know, it helps you kind of reset your values still and keep them in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Cool.
It's a
So
good
anything
topic though.
else
I
you
like
want
that
to
one.
mention in this one?
Yeah, it's good. It's a good
All
topic.
right.
I like
Well,
it.
thank you all so much for listening to this episode of the Existential Stoic Podcast, number 145, Before You Die.
Woo!
Hopefully you'll listen or watch
Yeah.
this before you die, because maybe there's just some information in here that might help you out.
It'll be hard to do after you die too.
I know, right? So make sure to check us out on all the podcasting services. Also watch us on YouTube. I'm Randy. That's Danny. I'll catch you later, Danny.
Hey, Randy.